My name is Robert Burg. I'm 63 years old. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, and now I live in Los Angeles, California. I was born at Michael Reese Hospital in Chicago. My birth date is August 3rd, 1946. My mom is Evelyn Lorraine Scora Burg, and my father was Harry Burg. My grandparents on my mother's side was Jack and Carrie Scora, and on my father's side it was Israel and Paula Burg. When I think back about my mom, my earliest memories of her are around when I was the age of 4 years old, and I don't think of her as a very happy person. I remember her as being a little overweight and wearing glasses, just not being very happy. She was always cold and distant with me, my mother was. And Donald was my younger brother Donald Burg was her favorite. And he always got more attention than I was, and I was always jealous of him. And my older brother and I used to fight on Donald because he got all the attention, and I received hand-me-down clothes from my older brother, which I always hated. So, and my mother was trying to save a buck, so I got the hand-me-downs, and so there's a lot of tension between me and my two brothers. Because I needed affection and I wasn't getting much at home from my mother, I had other mothers that I adopted. One was Gary Rothbart's mom, Julia. She was my favorite. And I would always go over and play with Gary, but also to get some nourishment, emotional nourishment from his mother, Julia. She was my favorite. You asked me the question about my mom's cooking. On a scale of 1 to 10, she was a -4. My mom had the same menu every week, week after week. On Sunday night, it was maid's night off, so she would order in delicatessen. On Monday night, she would have steak, and my dad would come home and eat steak. On Tuesday night, it was also meat. Forgot Wednesday night was. Thursday night, it was maid's night off, and my mom didn't want to cook, so it was TV dinners and chicken pot pies. Every other Friday night, it was brisket, and the other Friday night, it was baked chicken. And my parents would go out on Saturday nights, so my two brothers and I would have the leftovers on Saturday nights. So it was the same menu week after week after week. My mother would take the meat, she wouldn't use seasoning, and she'd cook it and cook it and cook it until it died. And my father would buy prime grade of beef, and my mother would just kill it. And one of the nicest things that happened to me is I went over to cousin Joel and Ellen's house, and Ellen was a great cook, and she made a roast beef, and I just loved it. It tastes so good. And I remember that. And that's when I realized that there's other people out there that are decent cooks. And another thing is, I think it's because my mom was a victim of the Depression, she didn't supply enough food. And I was on the wrestling team in high school, and I'd come home and I'd be starving, and she'd give me not a lot of food. And I would end up eating half of my food and half of my dad's food. And I would bitch and moan about it. My dad would bitch and moan about it. But she never supplied a lot of food. And that's one of the reasons that I married my first wife, Wendy, because she was a great cook and supplied a lot of food. My mom had the social skills. Not that my father didn't, but she impressed upon me like writing thank you notes and dressing more appropriate for different occasions. Where I would want to dress down, she would want to make me dress up. And my mother, of course, taught me to supply my kids with a lot of food. I remember one day I was in a custody battle with my first wife over the kids. And I had a shrink come to my house to see how I interacted with my kids. And the shrink got to my house early, and we drove up in the station wagon, the kids and I were carrying in 20 paper bags filled with groceries. And the shrink said, well, I guess we don't have to worry about you supplying enough food for the kids. So I went the other way, just the opposite of what I learned from my mom. I'm not a good cook, but I've always hired housekeepers to be better cooks than I have ever been. My dad was the breadwinner, and he worked long hours, and then he was selfish also, and with his time, and then he would play golf and cards. So he wasn't around all that much as compared to fathers today. He was a great provider. He made a lot of money, and he was a serious businessman. He was born extremely poor. His family moved constantly because they kept getting evicted from the apartments they lived in because they couldn't afford it to pay the rent. So he got jobs all during grammar school and high school and couldn't study because he would fall asleep in school. He didn't graduate from high school, but he became self-taught. He would always read. He worked several jobs, and he took care of his family as best as he could. His own father deserted the family, went back to the old country when my dad was a youngster, and the family was broken up, and all the kids lived at foster homes. They just couldn't stay together. So my father, just during the Depression, heard about a job at a company, and the guy was going to interview people to work there on Thursday at 1 o'clock. So my father went to this guy on Monday and said, I know you're not interviewing till Thursday, but I'll work here for free for a week. And if you like my work ethic, then you hire me. And that's how my father got his first big job in the nut and bolt business. And my father, after the war, started the nut and bolt business on his own, and he became ultra successful. At one time, he was the largest nut and bolt manufacturer in this country that was privately owned. So he did extremely well. My dad was warmer to me than my mother was. And maybe I was a little scared of him, always looking for approval from him. But we did play. We would go horseback riding. We would go exploring in his car. We would throw the baseball around. He would call a catcher's mitt a decker. I remember that. And he was very serious with business. My first summer jobs were working at his company. And every now and then we would go on trips together. We went fishing in Canada. He was better at letting the child out of him than my mother. When he felt guilty enough of taking time away from the kids, then he would come and play with the kids. And he would make a go-kart available for me, or a motor scooter available for my brother. And my mother would say, no, don't do it, but my father would do some of those things. So my mother was more of the killjoy. My father would refer to her as the War Department, meaning you be careful what he was doing. But he would also spoil my brothers and I. He bought Lori a Corvette for his first car when he was 19. He bought me an XKE Jaguar for my first car when I was 19. And he tried to do his best, but he was selfish with his time. I learned good things from my father and bad things from my father. In the beginning of my career as a parent of my kids, it was very easy for me to be selfish with my time too. But as time grew on, I became a better parent. So one of the things I learned from my father was not to be such a good parent, but over the years I became much better at that. I became, in my own right, a very successful businessman, and a lot of that I learned from my father. Did he specifically teach me this, this, and this? No, but just general business skills. My father was extremely honest and straightforward with people. My father had a very fine reputation in the business community. My father was also extremely charitable. Those traits I learned and I continue with to this day. I had a lot of resentment toward my parents until I was around 34 years old, going through my divorce. And I did a lot of therapy at that time, analyzing who I am, where I came from, what I learned from my parents, the good, the bad, the ugly, what I brought into the marriage, why I married Wendy. And with that, a lot of anger came to the surface, and I sat down with each one of my parents and I let them have it with both barrels about what they did right and what they did wrong. Thereafter, it cleared the air and we got along better. And I think there was more of an understanding on both of our parts, what they did right, what they did wrong. And life was better after that. Going through therapy, I learned how my parents became who they were from their parents and their environmental situations. And it made me more accepting of them for who and what they are. Some of the things I accepted and tolerated, and some of the things I didn't, and those were the things that I got into them for. My mom died from a cerebral hemorrhage when I was 41 years old. In 1987. She had had mini strokes, TIAs they're called. She had high blood pressure most of her life, and she just had a cerebral hemorrhage, and she was in a coma, and they pulled the plug. My father died in 1995. My father had had many surgeries, and accidentally, the maid, she was from Turkey, I believe, was backing the car out for my father to get into the passenger side, and the car knocked him down, and she ran over him. And it's funny when you think about it, but it undid his surgery for his esophagus, and they had to redo it, a new surgery that caused my dad to become very weak. And so he was on a walker, and the walker got caught in a throw rug in the bathroom, and my father's legs got tangled with the walker, with the throw rug, and he fell down and hit his head on the tile floor. And I guess there was a leak in his brain and the blood, and they pulled the plug on him a couple of days thereafter. I have two favorite memories with my mom. One was I was a good boy doing something right for one day for a change. So she took me to the supermarket and let me pick out cereal, and I could buy all the sugar cereals I wanted. That day kind of stood out in my mind. And then as a youngster, I always liked a lot of music. And every now and then, my mom would start singing songs that I had bought and I was listening to on the radio or bought the records themselves. And I remember one of those songs was Happy Heart, and all of a sudden she started singing that song, and it meant that, you know, she was listening to my music, and that really made my day that day. My father and I, we would sing songs more often together. One song was called Zena, 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 and another song was a Perry Como song, Catch a Falling Star, and Put It in Your Pocket. And I also remember as a kid, we were in Florida for Christmas vacation, and my father and I went to a drive-in movie, and just him and I together, and we saw the movie Away All Boats. I must have been 8 years old at the time, and it was kind of fun. My mom, Evelyn, died when Harry was 70 years old. And for 3 or 4 years later, he dated a little bit, not much, nobody special. And one day, he met Marge Geyer, who asked him for a charitable contribution. And Harry liked her a lot and wrote a check for the charity she was working with. And then he had to ask some people to get her phone number, and he got her phone number because he really liked her. And about a year and a half, 2 years later, they got married when Harry was 75. And the marriage worked out very well. They got along so well, traveled, had a lot of fun together. And then when Harry was 79, about 5 years later, he died. And Marge was wonderful. I always teased her about being my wicked stepmother. And I said to her, if I'm going to call you my wicked stepmother, what are you going to call me? She said, how about mean kid? I said, I love it. And even till today, which is many years later after Harry's gone, we still get along famously. I have two brothers, Donald and Lawrence. My older brother, Laurie, who's now deceased, was born in 1942, so he's 4 years older than I am. And my younger brother, Donald, was born in 51, and he's 5 years younger than I am. Donald had his own room, and the maid would always protect him. The maid's name was Lena, and she was from Germany, and she would always protect Donald from Laurie and I. Laurie and I had to share a bedroom. Donald had his own room, and he had his own toys. He was the PC, the privileged character. Donald and I were never that close until 15, 18 years ago, and we started becoming very close. We worked out our differences. We've become very close today, extremely close. My parents had 5 pregnancies, and 2 of them were miscarriages. And each time my parents wanted to have a girl. So Lawrence became Laurie. Me, Robert, I was called Roberta for many years. And Donald was supposed to be Donna. But my parents wound up with 3 boys, but they always wanted a girl. I always looked up to my older brother and wanted to be like him and hang out with him. And I would hang out with some of his friends. And even to this day, some of Laurie's friends that are 4 years older than I am, I still hang out with to this day. Donald I didn't have much to do with because he was the PC, the privileged character. And as a result, I just didn't do much with him. The 3 boys were always fighting, knocking heads. Oh, sure. Mostly pushing and shoving. I think we were all mischievous. When my parents would go out of town, we'd have parties and invite every kid in the neighborhood. One year we went to Oakton Manor in Delafield, Wisconsin, and Laurie and I pulled the fire alarm and emptied out the whole hotel. My dad was so mad. I mean, he just didn't want to see us. Another experience, a little older, we would go down to Miami Beach for Christmas vacations to get out of the Chicago winter. And we would go with the Weiners and the Rothbarts, and because the Weiners and Rothbarts' kids were dating each other. My dad, in this particular vacation, rented 2 cars. He rented a convertible for the family, and Laurie, he got a Corvette, a little Corvette, maybe 58, 59, with 3-speed stick. And the Rothbarts had a 4-door sedan. So one night, my dad took me out in the Corvette to teach me how to drive stick shift in Biscayne Bay. And Mike Rothbart took our family convertible, so Laurie was left with the 4-door sedan. And Laurie had met this girl from Beach High. I was maybe 15 and Laurie was 19 or 18, 17, I don't know. Anyway, she was real aggressive and very old for her age. So Laurie and this girl had sex in the back seat of the Rothbart 4-door sedan. And the next morning, Sam Rothbart is putting the golf clubs in the back seat to play golf with my dad and Mo Weiner and who knows who else. And he comes out holding a condom that had sperm inside. And this is at the Porte Cochere at one of these huge hotels in Miami with a lot of people there. And he's holding up the condom and he says, "Who in the hell left the loaded condom in the back seat of my car?" Well, if they figured it out that Lori had done it that night. And of course, everybody was laughing about Lori doing that. Okay?
Okay.
Gary Rothbart and I are freshmen at the University of Wisconsin A.E. Pi fraternity. And the fraternity pranks the house, and we get on a bus, and we go from Madison, Wisconsin to Milwaukee. And we're staying at the Shoreham Hotel in Milwaukee, and they give us the cheapest room with no view, looking over the roof of the hotel. And Gary and I find a dead body outside our hotel window in the middle of winter, an old lady. And of course, we called the hotel, and they call the fire department, and they bring up a stretcher to put this lady on, and she wouldn't stay on the stretcher. She kept falling off because she was, rigor mortis had set in, and she was like in a bundle. And eventually they strapped her in somehow and carried her down from the roof. Well, by the time it got to Gary's father, and it got back again, Sam Rothbart was spreading rumors that Gary and I had had sex with this dead body, which of course was not the case, but in any event, that's how it got back. When I think of my grandparents and my parents, around the age of 10 or 11, my grandparents used to come over to my house on Thorndale Avenue, and my grandma and grandpa and my parents and Lori and I, the six of us would play Hollywood gin with teams. And of course, my father was the best gin player in the world, and my grandpa was second. So I tried to get on their teams because I was the worst. And every Sunday night after a nice dinner, we would do that. And I was doing something with the grown-ups. I felt big, and it was a lot of fun for me. Two favorite cousins, Gail and Stuart Rosenthal. They live in Chicago, and we don't see each other very much. But Gail and I talk on the phone all the time. I have them come out to California's every winter to avoid the Chicago winter. And she's just wonderful. She's kind. She's a wonderful mother to her daughters and the grandchildren. They all live within a couple blocks from each other. She's the salt of the earth. Gail and Stuart have never had a lot of money, but they just do so well together, and I'm just happy to say that they're my favorite cousins. My father, Harry, and his sister, Teresa, they were Bergs, married a brother and sister, Scoras. They married Evelyn Scora and Bernard Scora. So their children of these two marriages are double cousins. So my cousins, Ronnie, Richard, Stephen, and Paul, are my double cousins, and genetically we're extremely close. Relationship-wise, we're not close at all. But it's just something I thought I would add to this video. From my age 7 to age 15, I spent summer camps at Eagle River, Wisconsin, Camp Interlochen. And it was the best of times for me. I don't know if I was happier to get away from my family during the summer, or my family was happy to get away from me. But in any event, it was a win for everybody. I was there with my best friend, Gary Rothbart, and his older brother, Mike, was there, and my older brother, Lori, was there. And we'd go canoeing and sporting and just all sorts of fun things all these years. And Gary's father was cheap, and so Gary didn't have a sleeping bag. He had a bedroll, which was just blankets rolled up together and held together by a strap. Well, it wasn't waterproof or anything like that. And in one of our early years, we would go on an overnighter, and it was raining cats and dogs, and water got underneath the tent, and Gary was soaking wet. So he came into my sleeping bag, and we spent the night together. Maybe 2 nights, I don't remember. But it was just a good, wholesome camp experience. We made a lot of lifelong friends at camp. And one of the counselors there, who was the head counselor, his name was Gil Magida. And Gil taught us about doing the right thing. Don't boo opponents, sportsmanship, your honor, your word, things like that we learned at camp. And one memorable experience is that I'm 7 years old in a spelling bee at camp, and they asked me to spell strike. And my spelling has never been good, and in those days it was pretty bad. In any event, in front of the whole camp, 125 people, up on the dais, I said S-H-I-T. And the whole camp broke up in laughter. And it almost ended the spelling bee. And I didn't know what I spelled. And not until an hour later, my older brother, Laurie, told me what I spelled. So, and I don't think I even know what shit meant, but in any event, that's what happened. I started New Trier High School in 1960, and in those days, New Trier was one of the top 25 high schools in the country. And I was just an average student there, and I was on the wrestling team for a couple years and played a lot of handball. While at New Trier, I was a B-plus student. Not the best, not the worst. I always studied long and hard, but I guess my ADD, I just didn't get the best grades. I made a lot of friends in high school, and it was interesting. Growing up in Chicago, I had friends who lived on the north side of Chicago, and when I was in high school, I would come and see those friends. And then living in Glencoe, I had friends from Glencoe, and then in high school, I also met some friends that lived in West Wilmette. So I had friends in 3 different geographical areas, and each one of those groups of friends were all different. In Glencoe, my close friend was Gary Rothbart. I have known him since I was 8 years old. In West Wilmette, there was Arvin Kagan, was my close friend. He still is today. Steve Wolf, Wayne Levenfall, Mike Becker. And these were guys that I would hang out with. And Mike Becker's brother, Allie, got me through college algebra, trig, and physics and chemistry. Allie Becker was really a smart kid. And then on the north side of Chicago, my close friends were Chuck and Harvey. I had friends for different purposes. Wayne Levenfeld was the smart friend of mine. And Mickey Friedberg was another one of my smart friends, if I needed to hang out with him. Another friend of mine who was very smart was Fred Zimmerman in Glencoe. And Fred and I have remained very close to this day. He lives in Phoenix. Fred went with me to grammar school, high school, and college. And we were fraternity brothers also. Sometimes I would hang around with the smart friends. And if I wanted to get into mischief, I would hang out with the friends in West Wilmette, like Arvin. And then if I wanted to meet some cute girls, sometimes I go into the north side of Chicago. So I had different friends for different purposes. I guess because as a youngster, I was always looking for attention, and my parents weren't giving me much. And whatever time and effort they had, they gave my younger brother. So I would act out, be mischievous, cause trouble. And I had some ADD, ADHD issues. And so I was not a very good student in school. My first grade teacher, Miss Atkinson, she was awful. I mean, she was just mean. And then the second grade teacher, Miss Leahy, she was just big and fat and always wore black clothes, and she just didn't do much. And then my third grade teacher, who wound up in a mental institute, she was Miss Gottschalk. And she passed me on trial into 4th grade. And my 4th grade teacher was Ruth Blonsky, who took me under her wing, gave me lots of love and affection, and thereafter I became a decent student. I went to Peterson School on the north side of Chicago through 6th grade, and then we moved to Glencoe, so then I went to 7th and 8th at Central Junior High in Glencoe, and then 4 years at New Trier High School in Winnetka, and then I went to Madison, Wisconsin for my first 2 years in college, undergrad, majoring in business. And then it was too cold and my asthma was acting up, so I switched to the University of Arizona, where I graduated cum laude 2 years later. And then I got my MBA at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles a year later. And after that, I decided to stay in Southern California and make that my home. In grammar school and high school and college, I made lifelong friends that have stayed with me all these years. And at Madison, I was in a fraternity, AE Pi, and have fraternity brothers that I keep in touch with to this day. My first girlfriend in 7th grade was Barbara Friesleben. And I never kissed her, and we were just pals. We hung out together. We wanted to go on American Bandstand TV, so we practiced dancing. Unfortunately, it never worked out. But that was 7th grade. In 8th grade, I had a crush on Sandy Swisslow. She was a new girl to school, and she was curvy and shapely, and we never went out. I just had a crush on her. Lori had a friend, Mike Rothbart, and he also had another friend, Gordy Yalper, and they were all about the same age, and each one of the three had younger brothers. Gordy Alper's younger brother was Sandy, and Mike's younger brother was Gary Rothbart. And the three boys hung out together in high school. That's when we met each other and became pals. And Sandy and I stayed friends all these years. And when he got married, I was at his wedding at age 21, and he was best man at my wedding 5 years later. And today, in 2017, Sandy and I and his wife Barb still hang out, and we're wonderful friends. Junior year in high school, my friend Harvey, who used to live on the north side of Chicago, and I hooked up with a couple ladies from Lincolnwood that went to Niles West High School. Along the way, Harvey was dating a girl that I kind of liked. Her name was Lynn Massover. And anyway, Harvey and her didn't work out. So when I was about 17, I started dating Lynn. And Lynn was my first love. And I kissed her a couple times. Anyway, I was too immature at the time. Things didn't work out. I didn't get along with her parents. I mean, it was just not a good thing. I had a lot of growing up to do at the time. But I really liked her. And after a year or two of college, I looked her up. And she lived in the city at that time, but I think she was engaged to be married. And then I looked her up a few years later, and she had died. She joined the Peace Corps and went swimming in Fiji and connected a bug, an amoeba of some sort, and she died 2 days later. And I saw her parents, and I expressed my condolences to them. It was sad. Lynn was sweet, she was beautiful in my eyes, and I was sorry. That was their only child. I was sorry for them. In 1971 or 72, I went to Tom Bergen's coffee house, and I met this cute little blonde shiksa by the name of Nancy Zawin. And Nancy was a nurse and just adorable, and I really liked her. And we spent a lot of time together that night at Tom Bergen's. We exchanged phone numbers, and then I said goodbye, and I called her up a couple of days later, and she said she was going to Hawaii for a week or two, and I said, well, I'd like to see you. I'll take you to the airport. And I took her to the airport, and boy, my heart was really pitter-patter over her. And when she came back, she said that she had gotten involved with another guy. And I said, okay. I says, if it works out, great. If it doesn't, call me. About 6 months later, she called me. And we started dating. And we dated for about 6 or 7 months. Unfortunately, I was in a bad space in my life, and a lot of anger was coming out for different reasons I don't remember at the time. So I wasn't in a good place, and it didn't work out. And in addition, she always, being a nurse, always wanted to marry a doctor. She married Mike Purley, and she was living in Long Beach, last I heard. My memory is not the best on how I met Wendy DeWard, who became my first wife. I believe what happened is that my friend Hal was dating her roommate, and so they fixed us up. And on my first date with Wendy, we went bike riding together, and we went shooting pistols. I had a pistol. We went to a pistol range, and I think we shot the pistol in those days. And I had a lot of fun. I thought she was beautiful. And so we also went to Penny's on my first date with her. And I bought 24 pairs of socks and underwear. And during that week, I washed the socks and I washed the underwear, and somebody stole my socks. So I put a note on the door saying, whoever stole my socks, you should know I have a fungus infection. I didn't have one at the time, but I wrote that on the door. Anyway, I didn't get my socks back. So on my second date with Wendy, we went back to Penny's. We bought another 24 pairs of socks. And again, during the week, I washed the socks to get the sizing out of it. And of course, somebody returned the original pairs of socks. So now I had 48 pairs of socks. So on my third date with Wendy, we went to Penny's and I bought 24 more pairs of underwear. She thought I was nuts. But anyway, a couple years later, we got married. I thought Wendy was beautiful. She had a nice shape. She was a great cook, supplied a lot of food, which I said. And I thought she was going to be a great mother to my kids. And I really liked her a lot. And I remember on the third or fourth date with her, something happened, and I saw my father that night, and I said, Dad, I think I met the girl I'm going to marry. A year or two later, Wendy and I got married. Wendy and I got engaged, and my parents did the wedding and some wedding showers in Chicago. A lot of my parents' friends had received so many baby showers and bridal showers from my parents that they felt this was a wonderful time for them to reciprocate, because this is the only Burg wedding. So they did several showers for Wendy, and she received a lot of fine gifts. 2 nights before the wedding, Wendy and I had a big blowout. And I guess, we were too carried along by all the festivities that maybe we should have postponed the engagement or the wedding or something. We didn't do it. We went through with the wedding, and I was very happy that day. In retrospect, I should not have gotten married at that time. I was just starting my career. I was successful, and who knows what would have been. But in any event, the wedding was paid for by my parents, who had most of their friends and family and their relatives there, although a big contingent from Buffalo, where Wendy is from, came for the wedding also. I remember my father toasting us, saying, I finally got a daughter. And I remember my mother walking down the aisle chatting with all of her friends. And my grandparents were there, and I remember having a little stag party with my grandpa there, which was kind of fun. And My brother, there's pictures of him, older brother Laurie, at the wedding, some with a mustache, some without. He shaved his mustache off during the middle of the wedding. We got married at the Westin Hotel in Chicago on Michigan Avenue. We had 200 people at the wedding. Our honeymoon, we took the train from Chicago back to LA, and we wrote the thank you notes. That was my mother talking to me, because she always pounded into me about writing thank you notes, writing thank you notes. And so we did it on our honeymoon. And when we got off the train in LA, then we got into Wendy's car. I had bought her a brand new Ford Mustang as an engagement present, plus the ring. And we drove the Ford down to Mazatlan, Mexico. And I got sick as a dog, so sick that the doctors kept coming into the hotel room giving me shots and nothing would help. So I had to get out of there. I was running 104, 105 temperature. I was just sweating like a pig and sick as a dog. And the doctors would come to the hotel room, give me shots, and nothing would help. So I said, I got to get out of here. So I flew home, and we hired a driver to drive with Wendy to the border. And it wasn't the best thing, but unfortunately, it was a honeymoon from hell. Walked into my doctor's office, and he looked at me, and he got me better. And by the time Wendy came home, I was starting to feel a little better. And so we went down to Palm Springs and spent a week at my folks' house in Palm Springs for our honeymoon. But Wendy was very angry with me for leaving her. And when she decided to divorce me, that was one of the reasons. Wendy and I got married May 25th, 1974. And I owned a couple pieces of property. We were just starting out. Wendy was working at the Department of Public Social Services. She hated her job, and she wanted to get pregnant and have a kid and quit working. And I wasn't ready to do that. We needed her income, and unfortunately, she got pregnant while she was on an IUD, and as a result, I elected to have an abortion. She went along with it, but she didn't want. And I said, when we're ready, better able to care for the child, then we'll do it. Anyway, we had the abortion. It was a very sad, hard time for us. And then about a year or two later, when we were ready, when I was ready, we decided to have a baby. We pulled out the IUD together with the doctor, and she became pregnant right after that. As a matter of fact, we were in Acapulco at the time that Cameron was conceived. This time we flew down, and we stayed at 5-star hotels, and we didn't drink the water, and Mexico turned out to be fine. Cameron was born January 1st, 1977, and I think that was probably one of my happiest days of my life. I remember he was born early in the morning, New Year's Day, and I brought a whole roll of dimes with me, and I called everybody I could think of, woke them all up from New Year's Eve. And I had shirts made that said Cameron's father, Cameron's mother, Cameron's brother, Cameron's uncle, Cameron's grandfather, and a little shirt for Cameron that said, I'm Cameron. And we took pictures of people with all these names on it, with the people wearing their shirts. And I even took a bottle of Pride and a bottle of Joy and put it on a baby's blanket, and I took a picture, and it said, my pride and joy. So when anybody would come up to me, I said, hey, would you like to see a picture of my pride and joy? I would take out the picture of pride and joy. And then I would show them a picture of Cameron. And when Cameron was 2 weeks old, I was allowed to take him out of the house. So I put him in the back of my Volvo car, and I drove him to all my buildings, and kept him out for 8 hours, and brought him back to Wendy, and it was just a wonderful time with Cameron. I really love being with him. Wendy was pregnant with Ashley, and when she was about 8 months pregnant, with a month to go, my brother in Colorado called me. He was in trouble. I flew out the next day to be with him, and I spent 24 hours or 48 hours there, and I came right back. And Wendy was mad at me because she felt I had left her again. And my brother was in need, and she wasn't due for another month. Unfortunately, the baby came the next day. And the baby was a month premature, and Ashley weighed 4 pounds, 14 ounces. So she was a preemie. And I was happy I finally had a girl, because we didn't know beforehand what it was. My wife and I did some things to have a daughter, and we got lucky. We got one. And during that day, she would upchuck her food. Nothing would stay down with her. So they did tests, and they found out that she had duodenal atresia, meaning her intestine was blocked. So I had to interview a surgeon that was going to operate on my daughter the next day. And I don't know how to interview surgeons. And I tried to talk to this guy, and he wasn't good at talking to me either. And I didn't know what to do. And a friend of mine, a fraternity brother, was an administrator at the hospital, Al Schwartz. And I said, Al, I told him the predicament I was in. He said, Bob, he's a mechanic, he's a repairman. All you care about is that he's got great hands and he can repair your daughter. If you need somebody to talk to, you talk to your pediatrician. And I talked to my pediatrician, and that was fine. He operated on Ashley, and she got down about 3 pounds, 13 ounces, if I recall. My office was right across the street from Cedars then, so every day after work I would go into the neonatal intensive care and play with her and hold her, and bring in some breast milk that Wendy had given me to bring to her, and I would feed her a little bit. And a month later, Ashley came home from the hospital. We had a welcome home Ashley party. When she came home, she was colic. She was crying constantly. And she was just a real pain in the ass. Wendy says that Ashley was premenstrual from the day she was born. It was just tough with her. And she had colic for a long time. And Ashley and I have always had a special relationship. She and I would drive in the car with the top down singing Madonna songs and playing it loud. And she would go on the back of my motorcycles. It was just special. Ashley and I have always had that relationship. While Wendy and I were having all this stress with Ashley, we decided to go skiing in Zermatt, Switzerland, in December of 1980. We had a bad situation on the mountain, and Wendy thought I was not sensitive and caring for her. The other gentleman that we were skiing with, his name is Jeff, was more attentive to her. So when we came back, Wendy decided that she wanted to divorce me. Just the stress of the baby, and all that combined, and all of her history of remembering everything I had done wrong over the years, the combination of all that, she just decided to divorce me. We separated February 2nd, 1980. Ashley was like 1.5 years, and Cameron was 2.5, around 4 at the time of our separation. We're separated for about 6 or 8 months. We decided to try again to try and see if we could work it out. We couldn't work it out, and so we finally got divorced. And it was finalized in 1985. We were living in Holmby Hills at the time, a very nice house. And when we sold the house finally, Wendy got the proceeds from the sale of the house. I kept my buildings, and then she said she wanted to move to Connecticut with a gentleman who was going to be her husband, and I said, no, the kids are going to stay here with me and you. She said, I'm leaving. So that started a custody battle that lasted a year. And eventually she did get married, she did move away to Connecticut. The kids stayed here with me. Wendy did get divorced, she came back to California. And the kids had spent more time with her than And then she got remarried, and she's been with her current husband now ever since then. I was one of the first men to win custody in court of my kids. In the very beginning, I wasn't the best father, and I was selfish like my own man was, and I wasn't that involved with the kids. But with the divorce, I became a better parent, and I got some good teaching from the kids' therapist, Gary Grock, and from my own shrink, Ivy Mooring, as to what to do in different situations. I remember many times I would call up the shrink, what do I do about this? What do I do about that? And we had some good help at the time, a housekeeper, Gladys, and then Julie. And the combination, we did okay with the kids. Not the best parent, not the worst parent. I suppose if I had it to do all over again, I would be a better parent. I think every parent would probably say the same thing. So I did the best I could with what I had at the time. And don't forget, my scripting was never to be a great parent. My scripting was to be a good provider. So I had to try to walk both paths. I used to say that I had the most expensive car phone bill than anybody, because I'd have to arrange for the braces, the tutors, the after-school sports, and so I was always on my car phone with the kids trying to get things done. My role model for being a father was my own dad, of course, and he was completely absentee. He was he made me a golf orphan. He belonged to 3 clubs, and then he was successful and spent a lot of time in his business, and then he spent a lot of time playing cards. So he wasn't around very much. So my mother did the best she could, but she was depressed, low energy. So in any event, for the most part, as a youngster, I had to fend for myself. I didn't want that to happen to my kids. I would not join a country club until my kids were grown and out of the house. I remember when my son was born on January 1st, early in the morning, I was so excited. I called all my friends. I had lots of dimes for the payphone. I was calling all over at 6:45 in the morning, bragging about my son, Cameron. And when he was 2 weeks old, I was allowed to take him out of the house, and I put the car seat in my car. I said goodbye to Wendy, and for the whole day, I took him to all the buildings. And I remember at one building, we were evicting a residential tenant, and I told the marshal, he owns the building. And it was just fun being with my son in my car that day. It was one of the best days of my life. And by the time I brought him home that night, my wife's breasts were very hard, and she was a little upset with me. But it was just a great day. And I loved being with Cameron. And I did a better job in spending more time with him than my father did. Maybe not the best as compared to some of the parents that I see today, but definitely a big improvement over my father. Growing up, I always expected myself to be the provider and my wife to be the parent and taking care of the kids. That was my role model, and that's what I expected, and I think Wendy expected that too. But when we got divorced and she wanted custody of my kids so she could move away to Connecticut, I put my foot down, and after a year, the judge awarded me full custody of the kids. And Wendy got married to her second husband, moved away to Connecticut anyway, and I was left with my kids. And I was living in a little apartment, so immediately I went out and bought a house and hired a housekeeper, and every week the kids went to see a child psychologist. This was something beyond what I was expecting. And there were several women mothers that I would call, what do I do about this? What do I do about that?
and I would call the child psychologist, and he would help me, and my own shrink would help me. And somehow or another, I muddled through, and the kids did okay. The rejection and move away that Wendy caused has left its imprint on my kids all their adult lives. I've done the best I could to be around the kids as much as I could, but nevertheless, there has been some hard times for them, and I wish I could take away that pain, and it's hard.
I played golf a little bit. I snow skied from age 14 on. I was on the wrestling team. Gary Rothbard and I were handball champs, intramurals at Nutria High School. And then as I got older, I started playing racquetball a lot, and I played that until I had my hip replaced, and I decided that I better not play too much racquetball after that. 1991, I had my first hip replaced. When I was 4, 5, and 6 years old, I pestered my dad to get a boat. I must have seen some boat someplace, and I wanted a boat. And one day, he was going to take my older brother and I and go boat shopping. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you call it, Lou Katzman called my father up, and he said, "Harry, what you doing?" And Harry, my father, said, "Well, I'm going to take the boys out and go boat shopping." And Lou talked my father into going golfing that day instead. And as a result, my father took up golfing, and he never much was interested in boating. But I always had a desire for boating, and I would rent boats here and there. In 1989, I sold an office building that I owned, made a little money, and I bought my first boat. It was a Sea Ray, a 21-footer. I took the Coast Guard Power Squadron safety course, and I had my salesman teach me for a few hours, and it was like sink or swim. And the kids and I would go out on it a lot, and I was a nervous boater, scared, but I had lots of fun with it. My kids sometimes liked it, sometimes didn't like it, but they could always bring their friends, and we tried to go on different trips throughout the state of California. I had that boat for 6 months, and I had the bigger boat disease. So about a year later, I bought a 27-foot boat with twin engines, another Sea Ray. It was yellow. It was really, I had a lot of fun with that boat, and had it for about 4 years. And then the 92, 3, 4 recession came, and I had to get rid of the boat. Selling that boat was a very bad day for me. I promised myself that when the economy turned around, I would buy a new boat. And about 4 or 5 years later, I bought a 33-foot Sea Ray that I had for 11 years. It was called the Pretty Woman, because we always sing that Roy Orbison song. Had it for many years. Took it all over the United States, Canada, the Bahamas, the Keys, Mexico, and down the Ohio River, Gulf of Mexico, and just a lot of times and good times with the boat. In 2008, I sold the boat. I got my eyes on bigger, better boats. I'm in between right now.
My first house from ages 0 to 5 was in Logan Square in Chicago. It was an apartment building on the 3rd floor. And there were lions outside out of concrete. It was not a very nice apartment. That was all my parents could afford after the war. And one day, my dad came home, and I was sitting on a window ledge with the window open, and the only thing separating me from falling down 3 stories was a screen. So with that, my dad said, "We got to get out of here," and he immediately built a house on Thorndale.
3420 West Thorndale, near Kimball and Peterson. And we stayed there from age 4 until age 12 and a half. And then we moved to Glencoe, 1195 Mayfair Lane, and I stayed there until I went to college. And then I would just come home for summers until I graduated college, and I moved to California. And so the Glencoe house was in our family until my father died, so basically 40 years. In all the houses, I never had my own private room. I was always sharing it with my older brother, sometimes even with my younger brother. So I never really had my own space. And I think that was because my parents designed the two houses, and my mother got cheap, and she didn't want to spend the money for an extra room for me. It was always, well, you can share with your brother until he moves out or something, and my older brother never moved out. So I was stuck with a room sharing. And as a result, when I became a parent, I made sure that my kids always had their own room and their own space, and they could decorate it the way they wanted, and it was their own. My older brother, Laurie, from age 15 on up, did drugs and alcohol, and it eventually killed him when he was 61 or 62 years old. Before that, and I think the reason for doing drugs and alcohol is that when he lived in the north side of Chicago, he was popular, he belonged to a private social club, he had a lot of good friends, but when he was 15, he moved out to Glencoe, and he didn't know anybody, and he felt out of place, and he wasn't well liked, and he started doing drugs and alcohol. He did make some friends, but he was troubled. And he went away to college, and he flunked out of Wisconsin, and he was just like a lost soul. He couldn't keep a job, and my father hired him, and he wouldn't show up for work. He was very self-destructive, drugs and alcohol. And eventually, he moved to Colorado. My father bought him a house. He was a trust fund kid. And he used my father left him a lot of money when my father died, and he just did drugs and alcohol, and it just killed him. It's a shame, because I used to look up to him, and he used to watch over me and take care of me. There was an incident where, when I was 16 or 17, I got beat up at the local bowling alley for being a Jew. And I came home, and I told my brother what had happened, and he went back to the bowling alley looking for the guy that beat me up. He was going to beat him up. Unfortunately, we couldn't find the guy that didn't like me because I was Jewish. So he was always there to be a protector for me. Laurie was very difficult, and I tried many times to get him off drugs and alcohol. And a couple years before he died, I instituted a intervention in Colorado, and hired the shrink, hired somebody from the court, hired a doctor, and Donald, my younger brother, and I, my father's second wife, Marge, we were all there trying to get him to commit himself to an alcohol drying out hospital. He wouldn't go, and about 6 months later he did go, and I went to visit him there, and it seemed like maybe he was going to change. And unfortunately, it didn't work out, and he went back to doing drugs and alcohol. And while he was doing drugs and alcohol, it was very impossible to have a normal relationship with him. He was flaky, he was lying, alibying. It was just very difficult. One funny occasion, he was supposed to come to my house for Thanksgiving, and he flew to my house. He got off the airplane, called his home, and there was something wasn't right about his dog. And so he got on another plane and flew back home that day and never made it to my house for Thanksgiving. I wasn't in his head. I didn't know what was going on. So another time he was supposed to come to my house, and I guess they took his driver's license away, so he couldn't get on the airplane. And he was drunk, and so it was just a mess. So I can laugh about it now in retrospect, but at the time going through it, it was tough. Donald, he got a degree in accounting at the University of Arizona. He copied me in my footsteps a little bit, and he bought a lot of apartment buildings in Arizona, and which he still owns to this day. And even before that, he opened up a store that sold Slurpees and freezes. It was called DB's after Donald's name. And so he always had little jobs and little businesses, but his heart was in apartments, and he owns several buildings now, and it's giving him a nice cash flow, and he's doing fine. Donald owned a video store for a short while that rented out DVDs and VHS tapes, but when the majors like Blockbuster and Hollywood Video came in, that was like the end of that. One special moment I remember when I was maybe 7, 8, or 9 on the north side of Chicago, and I was sick, and Laurie came home early after school, and he would play with me, and we made something with a Gilbert Erector set. And then later on that evening, Dr. Klein came over to my house, Reuben or Seymour Klein, and gave me an injection. And I showed him my Gilbert Erector set, what I had made, and he was impressed with it. And it was nice because my brother would play with me. That was nice. Another special moment about Lori is that my parents, when I was a youngster, Lori and I would dress alike. We would have brown tweed sport jackets, and we would have fedora hats. And when it got real cold in the winter, my parents bought us bright red jackets. I remember that picture. So we were kind of alike in that respect. Another fond memory of Lori, my dad had a yellow Army surplus rubber raft. And we would fill it up with water in the backyard in our bathing suits, and we would run around and jump into the rubber raft as if it was a swimming pool. And I would always follow Lori around. I was like his shadow. I don't think Donald and I did all that much as a youngster. I remember getting a go-kart when I was like 12. And Donald would ride the go-kart sometimes, and I souped it up. It was supposed to go like 4 miles an hour, and I made it go 21 miles an hour. And the police were always impounding the go-kart in Glencoe because we were getting into trouble. And so Donald did that a little bit, copying me a little bit, but we weren't that close as youngsters. I used to terrorize Donald, pick on him, beat him up, do everything I could to piss him off. And the maid was always there protecting Donald. I didn't like him. He was getting all the attention, and I was getting hand-me-downs and leftovers. And Donald would get all new clothes. So I didn't like him as a kid.
Around the year 2000, 2001, Donald met Noelle. And it was instantaneous love between these two. And she had younger kids. And so Donald put off the wedding as long as he possibly could. But the two of them were always traveling in Donald's RVs, and they loved the Pacific Northwest, San Juan Islands. And so as of today, 2016, they've been married 10 years, and their wedding was on San Juan Island, and they had about 150 people from all over the country fly up and spend a long weekend up there. And it was just beautiful. And Noelle and her kids are a big part of our family, and we're always doing things with them. And my kids adore Uncle Donald. From both of my parents, I've learned the meanings of being well organized. So starting in the early 70s, I developed a habit, a good habit, of every year I get new appointment books. These are red books that show all my appointments, all my phone numbers throughout the year. And I've kept them all these years. I have a whole stack of them in my office, and it keeps me well organized day by day, and that's my system. This is my red book for 2016.
Career-wise, in college, when I was a junior or senior in college, my father sold his company, his nut and bolt company, to Beatrice Foods. And my older brother and I flew home to Chicago to try and stop him from doing it. But my father was so insecure financially, being a victim of the Depression, that this was a golden opportunity for him, and he took it. He regretted it the rest of his life. And he started another screw company, and he named it after my brother, Lawrence. His first screw company was called Accurate Threaded Fasteners. But in any event, I tried to talk him out of it. I couldn't do it. And then I went to grad school, and I figured out that the guy who put my father's company together as a broker with the company that bought it, he was called Finder. And he made a tremendous profit by putting the two companies together. And so I said, I want to be a Finder too, and I'll get commissions. And it looked very good until, as a senior in college, I took a real estate course at the University of Arizona, taught by Dave Sirota, who I still keep in touch with today. And Dave got me so interested in real estate that I decided I didn't want to be a finder for companies to merge. And then when I got my MBA at University of Southern California, I took some real estate courses there, and I said, that's what I want to do. I want to own buildings. I interviewed with several real estate companies after I got my MBA, and my first job was with Matlow and Kennedy doing office leasing. My first year, I made $867 in commissions. My parents were supporting me. And after 1 year, my dad called me up and he says, Bobby, why don't you come back to Chicago and be my executive vice president? I'll pay you $50,000 a year salary then. That was in 1970, so that was a lot of money in those days. I will give you the car of your choice, an expense account, and a country club membership. I said, let me think about it. I bought some time with a shrink, and I called him back about 6 weeks later, and I said, I really appreciate it, Dad, but I want to do this one on my own. I did office leasing for a year and a half, and I got fired from this company. My heart wasn't in it. They were abusing me, and I made some commission money, and they took most of it away from me. So it was just a very depressing period of time for me. In hindsight, I should have taken them to the Labor Relations Board and sued them for my commissions that they stole from me. But in any way, it was a good experience learning how not to treat employees. And with them, after that, I went to do property management work, and I got my certified property management designation. So I'm a CPM as well as a real estate broker. And I did that for about a year and a half. And I worked with Gribben Von Dial, doing property management of their apartment buildings and an office building or two. And I really liked property management as a way of managing buildings that I would own one day. And eventually I got fired from them too, because my heart wasn't in managing other people's buildings, it was in managing my own building. In 1972, in Chicago, my father found a warehouse that was for sale. And with his help, I bought this warehouse, and it was leased to Consolidated Foods, which is Sara Lee. And they have been my tenant in the building for 40 years now. While that was going on, I was working in property management for Gribben Von Dial, and in September of 1973, I was fired because my heart wasn't in property management, my heart was in trying to find buildings. I did find a building, and I closed escrow on December 31st, 1973. Jerry Felsenthal was my broker, and he found the building. It was a beautiful old Spanish courtyard hacienda building in Hollywood that was formerly owned by Rudolph Valentino. My father guaranteed at the bank the down payment for me. I sold the building, and I made a lot of money at that time, which enabled me to buy 3 other apartment buildings. But sooner or later, I ran out of cash, usually sooner, and so I would have to get investor partners. And my first investor partner was Mort Olshan, and he stayed with me for many, many years. We did several apartment buildings together, and we had a very fine, good relationship. Although Mort always jokes around and says, Robert, I was a multimillionaire before I met you, and now I'm just a millionaire. That was he would always tease me about that stuff, but we had a wonderful relationship. And along the way, I met Matt Quitman, and Matt is a contractor builder, and he would build apartment houses in the West Side. And so together we formed a little partnership, and I would do the legal and get equity and get the debt and do all the financial information, and he would build the buildings. And we built a couple buildings together, a condominium project, and we got investors, and we did very well. And our last condominium project on Weatherly, our investors got back $6 for every dollar they put back into the building. So we did very well for them, and of course Matt and I did very well for ourselves too. At that time, my wife, Wendy, and I, we always used to celebrate when we would make a deal and we would treat ourselves. And we would say, well, when escrow closes on the next deal, we would buy a VHS tape recorder. When the escrow would close on the next deal, Wendy got a gold watch. Escrow closed on the next deal, I got an antique Corvette. And it was always after escrow closed, because that's when we would treat ourselves. And finally, we shortened that down to AEC. And then I got my license plate on my car, says AEC, after escrow closes. And I've kept that all these years. After we built the last set of condominiums, Matt and I, rent control came in to the apartment houses, and simultaneously builders of condominiums were getting sued all the time by the homeowners. So I got out of the condominium business and I sold all my apartment buildings because of rent control, and I went into industrial real estate. I met my partner Lee Siegel at the gym. He was a real estate broker and he knew all about industrial buildings. We formed a partnership. It lasted about 15 years and we built a lot of warehouses. Eventually we hired another guy, his name was Babe Durenya, to be our contractor, and he built the building so fast and so cheap that we made him a general partner with Lee and myself. And we built many buildings together, and unfortunately we were highly leveraged, and when the 92-93 recession came, that leverage came back to kick us in the butt, and we had to make a lot of workouts with the lenders. Simultaneously with that, Babe, the contractor, flew his jet into a mountain, got killed, and in the same week, Lee filed a personal chapter, so I was all by myself. I bought the interest of Babe's estate and Lee's bankrupt estate out from them, and I owned all the buildings by myself, but there was no equity in the buildings. And with my attorney of many years, Jay Grant, and my accountant, Greg Nathan, of many years, I was able to re-syndicate some partnerships, cram down the lenders in some situations, and I came out smelling like a rose. But for a year, there was a lot of gray hair and a lot of tums and a lot of tagament, and it was a very touchy-going thing at that time. And I became a success thanks to those gentlemen. All along in my business career, I've always ran out of cash and always needed investor partners. That's the way real estate goes. If you want to grow and expand, you need equity, and sometimes I didn't have equity, so I'd have to bring in investors. I've always treated my investors with kid gloves and treated them with the utmost respect, kindness, diligence, and honesty. If anything, I've given my investors too much information. Everything I've done has been completely transparent, so they know exactly what's going on. To this day, I can talk to any investor that I've had in the past, and I believe they will say kind things about me. Unfortunately, Lee Siegel and I had a falling out. He was the one who taught me a lot about industrial real estate, and he was the broker, and he would find the land, he would find the tenants for our buildings, figure out how to design the buildings. He brought an awful lot to the table. I would do the finance, the legal, the accounting, get the investors, get the loans. And our partnership worked very well with our third partner, Babe, building the buildings for us. Unfortunately, Lee and I had a fundamental difference of opinion. My attitude has always been to pay off the loans, own the buildings free and clear, get rid of the debt. Lee lived way above his means. He was driving a Rolls Royce, living in a very expensive home in Beverly Hills, and as a result, he always wanted to refinance the buildings, pull out cash, and use that cash to live on. And it was a fundamental flaw, and it would permeate a lot of our relationship attitudes about our buildings and what to do, and it just was a sore point. Another thing is that Lee always seemed to lie, and he would lie by changing the facts on different issues or sometimes withholding information. And those are two different types of lies, and the second type is much harder to find out when somebody's withholding information from you. And I would get Lee would say something to me, and I would have to talk to other people to verify what Lee was saying was the truth. And I caught him in several lies, and it was so bad that I brought him to my shrink, Ivy Mooring, to see what we could do to better our relationship. And of course, he lied at the shrink's office too. So we were partners at this point, but not good partners. And in the beginning of our relationship, I looked up to Lee. He was tall, dark, and handsome. He dressed very like GQ, and he drove very nice cars, and I was like a schlepper. And he got me to dress better, to drive nicer cars, and I owe him a lot because of that. He introduced me to industrial real estate. He taught me the ropes, and I am forever indebted to him for that. But eventually, he had 4 mortgages on his house, and he went bankrupt. And that was the opportunity for me to get rid of him as a partner. I bought his shares out through the bankruptcy court, and he is very upset with me for that. Lee thought that he could go through bankruptcy, be relieved of all of his debts, still own pieces of our buildings, and still get leasing commissions. And that was not going to be the way it was. And what happened after Lee left my partnership is that I used other brokers to find tenants for me in the buildings, and it was much easier negotiating with them. And we would keep tenants. When Lee was doing the brokerage for my buildings, the tenants ended up hating us, and now it's completely different. We've had tenants that needed more space and we couldn't accommodate them. They moved out, and then they come back to us. And if Lee was doing the brokerage, we never could have done that. So the bottom line is our values are different, and we just haven't really spoken in the last 15 years. My other partner, Babe, was our contractor. Babe was born in a house that didn't have a floor. It had a dirt floor. And he became ultra successful building warehouses. He built 300 warehouses before he crashed his jet from wind shear and killed himself and 6 other people. But Babe and I got along very well. We did one deal together. He looked at how I was keeping the checkbook one time, and thereafter he never questioned me ever again about the money. There was an honesty and a truth and a trusting between us, and there was never any question. Where Lee and I always had issues, Babe and I never had issues. And Babe and I, not only were we business partners, but we were social friends. I used to go over to his house and play tennis, and he had 4 Rolls Royces. We would trade cars. I flew his jet the week before he got killed in it. I got along with his wife and his son, and after he died, and his wife and son choose no longer to be my partner, they wanted out, it was very easy for us to make a deal, and it worked out. So today we're still friends. And I think that says a lot about my secret of success, that I've never tried to intentionally or unintentionally try to screw anybody. And I think one of my methods for doing that is that I use an attorney who is like me. We make deals. In real estate, it's so easy to litigate. We never have litigated anything. One day we had to go to the courthouse because of Lee's bankruptcy, and my attorney got lost. And I'm laughing at it. I said, "You're the best attorney in the world. You don't know where the courthouse is." And he's upset. But anyway, I think that one of the secrets of my success is you have an attorney that makes deals. Another secret, I would say, is always be honest and straight with people. We don't play games. We might have to tell people things that they don't want to hear and don't like, but I find that if I keep telling lies to people, it takes too much energy to keep track of what's going on and what lie you've told to people. During the 93, 94 real estate depression, I mean, there were lenders coming after me like alligators biting me. It was, tenants were leaving. I mean, the buildings were half filled. I mean, it was a mess. And we always told the truth to everybody about every situation. And 7 out of 8 lenders worked with us. And it came out smelling like, I came out smelling like a rose. One lender, which was Phoenix Home Life, played games with me. I was very straight with them, but eventually they did foreclose and I did lose the building, I'm sorry to say. We were just too highly leveraged at that time. And subsequent to the '93 recession, I've learned my lesson well, and now today, 2010, all my buildings are free and clear. And so to quote my dad, now I'm bulletproof. Nobody can hurt me. Another thing with partners, investor partners, is that I've always attempted to work with the same partners. And so if a new deal comes away, I will always go back to my old partners first before I take in new partners. Even though dealing with new partners might be easier for certain things, I've always stuck with the old partners, and they appreciate that. I have one gentleman, Joel Greenberg, who's mad at me because I can't find any deals to put him in. But I'd rather have that than do a bad deal with my investor partners. Another secret of my success is in putting together these real estate deals, I don't take any money out of the deals when I'm forming the partnership. I always put my own money into the deals. So I'm at risk just like the investors. And when investors see you're at risk, they feel more comfortable, they're more trusting. It makes everything go easier. The same thing with the banks and the lenders. I've always been straight with them. It's never been a problem with my bankers. And sometimes they don't like to hear what I have to say, but I've always been straight and truthful with them. I learned a long time ago that if you surprise your banker, they're going to surprise you. And so as a result, the bankers have always been in the loop on all my decisions, no surprises or anything like that.
My board of directors consists of Jay Grant, my attorney of over 40 years, my accountant Greg Nathan, he's been my accountant for 30 years, and I have another attorney, Fred Rollman, of 20 years. These 3 gentlemen have been my friends, my consigliaries. They're wonderful. They've kept me out of trouble over all the years. They help me make decisions. Their wisdom has been wonderful, and I don't make a major decision without talking to these guys. They're always there for me. They return the phone calls very quickly because they all know I'm impatient, and I'm happy to say that I love these guys and we're a great team together. Every year during Super Bowl parties, at my house I have a Super Bowl party for about 60 people. And during the year, if there's ever an opportunity that I've paid off a mortgage on one of my buildings, then we go in the backyard and burn the mortgage. And Jay says a couple Jewish prayers and we light the fire. And it's just an event that we've done over the years, and it's fun to do. Between wives, it was approximately 20 years. And I figured it out once that I had gone out with about 1,000 women during that period of time. I averaged about 2 dates a week for 20 years. Along the way, I met a lot of ladies that were very nice. And it didn't work out as far as a dating relationship goes, but they became friends of mine that I initiated a club called the Pluton Society. And each one of these ladies I would call my Plutons. And we always would hang out together. And one of their birthdays was around Christmas time. So we would all get into a limousine, and the ladies would be dressed to the nines, and I would wear my tuxedo, and we go to a very, very fancy high-end restaurant. And I would usually get to the restaurant early and get to the table and put presents on the table seats for these ladies. And I would walk into the Bel Air Hotel, and every head in the restaurant was turning because there I was walking in with all these beautiful ladies. It was fun. And we'd laugh and drink champagne. And I keep in touch with 4 of my Plutons today. It's just a nice, friendly relationship. Because these ladies are classy, nice, and good friends, that they all get along with Robin. They all love Robin. And some of them were at my wedding to Robin. It's just a nice, friendly, good relationship. One of my traits is that I'm very good at introducing people of the opposite sex, and I've created 5 marriages that have lasted many years, and I'm very proud of them. One of them is with Al Redmond and Irene. I introduced them in college at Wisconsin. Another one is my old roommate, Danny Murphy and Sue Brofman. I introduced them when I was about 24 years old. Another marriage I've introduced is Joel and Nancy Klein. About 17, 18 years ago, I introduced them. They've been married 15 years. Robert Wolf and Liz Poppert, I introduced them a couple years ago, and they got married last year. And Mark Bloom and Karen Salter, they've been together for 4 years now. They're living together, but because he's 80 years old, he's a little gun shy about getting married. So they've been together for 4 years. They talk about marriage, but they haven't done it yet. When I was 47 years old, I met Sandra Marcos. She lived in Monterrey, Mexico. She's a Mexican national. And we met on a dating service. And for the next year and a half, we dated. I fell in love with her. And we got engaged. And unfortunately, the language differences, the cultural differences, the religious differences didn't work out. And as a result, I broke off the engagement. She was a very nice, sweet lady. I learned a lot from her, and she's just a sweetheart. Some of my other longtime friends, Gary I met when I was around 10 years old. Well, 8 years old in camp, I think. And Richie Rosen I met at 10. Fred Zimmerman I met at 12. And those, Al Redmond I met at 12. They've been in my life 60 years. And out in Southern California here, I've met a lot of lifelong friends too, that they've been in my life all these years too. I'm very lucky to be blessed with all these nice people throughout my life. As of this recording, they've been married 2 months. They met about 3 years ago. They dated for 2 years, and then they got engaged. Jeff was working in South Lake Tahoe at a Patagonia store when Ashley popped in December 31st, and they hit it off, and they have a lot of common area points. They love to snow ski, snowboard, hike. They share a dog together. They both ride motorcycles. We've gone on motorcycle trips together around Lake Michigan, and our family adores Jeff. He's been to our home many times. I've introduced him to golf, and he and I are great golfing buddies. And the wedding was up in Napa last month, and it was a beautiful affair. And what can I say? I'm smiling just thinking about them. They're doing very well together. They bought a new house together in Sacramento. Ashley's a public defender up there, and Jeff is in real estate up there. He's a manager of facilities for Centene, a large New York Stock Exchange company. Matt Quitman was building an apartment building across the street from where I lived on Centinela Avenue in West Los Angeles. And because I love real estate and construction, I would always go over and talk to Matt when I would come home from work every day. And we became very close friends and partners. And he was at my wedding, and I was at his wedding. And we've stayed friends for 30, 40 years already. He was a great partner. We built buildings together. And I'm smiling because I think of the wonderful fun times Matt and I had together. In approximately March or April of 2000, I had gone out to the West San Fernando Valley, and I got a brand new golf club way out there. It was an expensive driver called a Katana Sword. And I couldn't wait to get home to try it. So I went to a driving range I never go to, Balboa Park. As I'm walking to the stall to hit the driver, there's this cute lady hitting golf balls, and I noticed she has a real good swing. So after she hit a nice shot, I said to her, "Nice swing." And she turned around and smiled. About a half an hour later, after hitting the driver, not very well, but nevertheless, I was hitting it, I noticed she was chipping balls in a different part. So I walked over to her and I started talking to her. And she was very easy to talk to, had a great smile, a friendly personality. And I said, "You know, if you're single and available, I'd like to buy you an iced tea." And Robin's response was, "I don't know if I am." And I said, "Huh?" She said, "Yeah, my husband of 29 years just left me." I says, "Oh no." And we talked another half an hour, and she was just terrific. And I thought about giving her my card and asking her to call me if it didn't work out. But that's like bad karma, and you don't want to do that. And so I said goodbye, and I wished her well. And I walked to my car, and I put the clubs in the trunk, and I took out my business card, and I wrote down my home phone number, and I decided to take a chance. So I walked back to her, and I said, "Listen, I really like you, and I really hope it works out. But if it doesn't, here's my card. Please contact me." And about 7 months later, toward the end of December, she sends me a holiday card. She says that she really enjoyed our conversation, and please email her. She'd like to get together. So I emailed her saying I was leaving for China the next day. I'd be gone a month, and when I get home, I will look you up. And a month later, we made a date to get together to hit out golf balls and get a bite to eat. And that morning it's raining. And I called her up on the phone. I said, "You want to pack it in, or do you still want to get together?" And she said, "No, I want to get together." I said, "Okay, I'll pick you up at 10:30. I'm going to kidnap you. I won't tell you where we're going, and we'll have lunch." And she said, "Well, I got to be home at 2 o'clock for a manicure appointment." I said, "No problem." So I went to the store, and I bought a dozen red roses. And quite frankly, I forgot who she was and what she looked like. But in any event, I went and I picked her up. And when I saw her, it brought back the memories. I mean, in those 7 or 8 months that I hadn't seen her, I'd probably gone out with 25 ladies, 20 ladies in that time. So, but anyway, I gave her the roses, and she went in my car, and I drove to Toys R Us off of Reseda Boulevard in the valley. And as we pull into the driveway, she says, "Why are we coming here?" And I said, "Well, you've been here before to buy toys for your kids for birthdays or whatever, and I've done that for my kids." I said, "Let's go here and buy toys for ourselves." And she said, "Fine." So we bought a battleship game, we bought a robot, and I bought her a feather boa. It was purple, and she still has it today, I think. Anyway, we went out to eat a little sandwich or two, and then we went back to her house to play Battleship, and she showed me her power tools. I was very impressed. Anyway, this was on a Friday, and I said, "You know, Sunday is Super Bowl, And at my house, I'm going to have 60 people, and you won't know anybody, but I think you'll have a fun time. So she came to my house. She brought big bones for my 2 dogs, and she stayed late. A couple of my single friends hit on her, and ever since then, we've been together. Robin and I have been together for 16 years and married for 12. Robin is wonderful. My kids adore her. All my friends love her. She's so easy to get along with. She's beautiful, easy on the eyes, and get with her kids. And now we have grandkids together, and she's just the best person ever. And my life is wonderful thanks to Robin, and I'm just blessed. I was extremely fortunate in life that I knew early on what I wanted to do. After I got my master's in finance from Southern Cal, I immediately started in real estate. And I've been in real estate for 50 years. Different parts. I was in office leasing to start, and then I went into property management, and then I went into owning apartment buildings, building apartment buildings, building condominiums, and then eventually I got into industrial warehouses, and I've been in that for 40 years now. I'm really happy that I found my niche, and I've been very successful in that field, and I've met some very fine people in that field that have been my friends for 40 years or so. And some of these people are my partners, long-time partners. Like my father, my competitors have become my friends. And we share information, and we help each other out all the time. And my father was like that in the nut and bolt business in Chicago. And the best part for me about owning real estate is that it affords me time to go on travels. It's a lucrative business for me. Just have fun. I enjoy owning buildings, making deals with tenants, and buying properties, selling properties. It's been fun for me, and it puts a smile on my face when I get up in the morning going into my office. Sure, there's days when you have troubles and things like that, but by and large, it's been mostly good days.
When my kids were young, I brought them to the buildings, and when my father passed away, he left my kids some money, and I took that money and I invested it in my buildings. So my kids own pieces of several of my buildings, and they get a little cash flow to live on right now. As this tape is recorded, Ashley is 30 and Cameron is 33. Ashley is a successful attorney, and Cameron is a businessman trying to be an entrepreneur. In taking my kids to the buildings, I would show them the income statement, the profit and loss statements of the buildings. And sometimes they were interested and sometimes they weren't. Sometimes they only wanted to know how much cash they were going to get. And I would go over all that stuff, especially when the income tax returns came out. They were real young, and they got 1099s and K1s, and they had to sometimes pay income tax. And of course, I would have to give them the money for the taxes, but at least they had some idea of what was going on. And they seemed very responsible about income taxes today. And so that was one thing I taught them. We would sometimes have discussions. Cameron has taken more interest in it now as to what tenants are doing, who's moving in, who's moving out, what the cash flow is and things. And Ashley, to a lesser degree, is interested too.
For the last 16 years I've been with Robin, we put 2 maps in our house. One of the United States and one of the world. And wherever Robin and I are together, we put a red pin wherever we spent a night. And we have lots of pins on that board. In the United States, we have slept in 48 states for a total of 259 nights in different locations. Outside of the United States, we've been to 51 countries totaling 126 nights. We have the travel bug, and we're always having our suitcases packed and ready to go. With the RVs that we've had over the years, with my boat going different places, and going overseas and renting boats has always been fun. And there's so many places to talk about. We'd need hours to talk about all these different wonderful experiences. And during my life with Robin, we probably travel 75 to 80 days a year. And I don't know, and motorcycling different places too. We've motorcycled through the fjords of Norway, the Alps of Switzerland, and Robin drives the chase car with all the suitcases. She's wonderful. We've driven around Lake Michigan with Ashley and her husband on motorcycles. We've boated in the Pacific Northwest around Seattle in my own boat and boats we've rented. We've done the rivers and canals of France and Holland. So we've gone lots of different places, and I don't know if I have a favorite one. Just last year we did northern Canada and we saw the polar bears, and that was fun for me. I really enjoyed that. Cameron, for junior high, got into Crossroads. Before that, he was going to Stephen S. Weiss Day School. And Crossroads, which was a few miles from my house, worked out really well for Cameron. It wasn't a structured environment as much as I would have hoped, but nevertheless, he got a wonderful education. He was accepted into 15 out of 17 colleges he applied, and he ended up going to Tulane. He wanted a warm climate school, a good school, and so he graduated from Tulane, and then he came back to California to make his fortune. And Ashley graduated from Crossroads, and she went to the American University in Washington, D.C. She graduated cum laude, and she took off a couple years. She worked at Aspen, tending bar for a few years, and then she lived in San Francisco helping troubled kids at a special school. And she realized then that she couldn't help these kids unless she had a PhD in psych or a law degree. And she decided to go to law school at USF, University of San Francisco Law School. And she wanted to become a public defender and help troubled kids. And while she was in law school, she helped as a public defender troubled kids. And she even tried a case, even though she hadn't passed the bar. And she graduated law school. And after a couple starts, different places, she got a job at the public defender's office in Sacramento. And I think she's been there 8 or 9 years now. And she's trying cases and doing extremely well. I think her batting average is about 80 or 75% of her cases. She either hangs the jury or wins the cases. So I'm extremely proud. I went up there and I would help pick a jury and hear cases and hear her closings. And it puts a smile on my face because I'm really proud for her. And while she was up there, a few years ago, she met her fiance, Jeff, while skiing in Lake Tahoe. And they have a wonderful marriage. At this time, this is July 2016, they've been married a month. Cameron has tried several different things. He wants to be an entrepreneur. And as of today, he owns pieces of 2 retail marijuana facilities in San Francisco. He's working for a billionaire living in Uruguay. He's trying to get into the marijuana business in a big time, either in Uruguay or Las Vegas. So he has a couple different irons in the fire, and he's living in Uruguay. He's happier than he's ever been. And he doesn't have a lot of money, but he's doing well. It's different. His career path is certainly different than mine. I went straight into business, bing, bang, boom. But Cameron marches to his own drum beat, I should say, and he's happy. While living in LA for years, he was never happy. He was just getting by. And now he is happy. He's learned Spanish. He's met some real nice people down in Uruguay. Robin and I visited him last year, and he doesn't have a car. He gets around in bicycles, but there's a smile on his face. He's happy. And during the summertime, when the rental prices in the market for residential goes up by 15 times, he comes back to LA for a couple of months and stays at our house. So we do get quality time with him every year. Robin's sons, Keith and Kevin, have both married wonderful daughters, Shannon and Nicole. And Kevin and Nicole have two sons, Lincoln and Travis. We call him Travie. And Shannon and Keith have a daughter, Avery. So we spend good quality time with them. We love the grandchildren. We play with them. They come over to our house and swim in our pool. And they've taken over the house in terms of space. We got their kids' toys all over the house. And it's just, I go into a room where the kids are, or kids are about to go, and I don't know what to expect. And the best thing is that we have two dogs, a Blondie and Buddy. And these dogs are so good with the kids, the grandkids, that they pull on their ears, bite their ears, pull on their tails, and the dogs are so good and gentle with the grandkids. It's just fun. Don't burn bridges. I keep people into my life forever, just about. And so I don't want to ever burn a bridge. I've always had the policy of returning phone calls within 24 hours. Some people have excuses, not returning calls and this and that, and I've never believed in that. I always return my calls within 24 hours. Never screw people. And I remember years ago when I started first in real estate, I had my red appointment books. And if anybody ever brought me a deal, I would put the date and who brought me what deal. And 5 years after somebody brought me a deal, I had realized that this person, I'd looked through my book, it's 5 years old, and there it pops up. And so I sent this guy, it wasn't a lot of money in those days, it was $200 because that was a finder's fee. And of course, I get the phone call a week later, Burg, why are you sending me $200? I said, because you brought me this deal, and I forgot about it, and I owe you the money. So anyway, he and I went out and spent the $200 on a dinner or something like that. Another thing, a secret of my success, is using Jay Grant, my attorney. My attorney, Jay, is wonderful at making deals. He'll get me from A to B. We might have to go to C and D, but he will get me to D. And I think people choose attorneys like themselves. If you're a deal maker, you make deals. If you're a litigator and fighter and this and that, then you choose an attorney like that. And Jay Grant's been wonderful. Another secret of my success is I've always paid off my loans. And that's why in real estate recessions, I don't get hurt very much. A lot of people that have a lot of debt get themselves in trouble. And I think if I used more debt, I'd probably be more wealthier than I am today, but I want to sleep good at night. In all of my real estate deals, I've never taken upfront money out of the deal. When a deal comes along and I make the deal, I'm always putting my own cash into the deals. I might not have the cash, I might have to borrow it from the bank, but that's the way I have to live. I don't want an investor to think, well, Burg's not putting in money in deals, but that's not right for me. When my father grew up, his family was so poor that they kept getting evicted from apartments every 3 or 4 months. And as a result, his family took a lot of money from Jewish welfare. So as my dad got older and more successful, he always gave back to charities, lots of charities. He built a huge tennis complex in Israel, in Arad, Israel. And my dad was always giving money to people, B'nai B'rith, wherever people would ask or organizations would call, my father was always there. And this is something that I've learned about giving money to charity myself. And for years, I would write the big checks, but I would never see where the money would go. So starting about 15 years ago, I changed. And Robin and I introduced 10, 11 Jewish kids that couldn't afford to go to college. And we picked one, Matthew Messenger, and we paid for 4 years college, room, board, tuition, and books. Matt wanted to be a doctor. He didn't have the gray matter, so he became a nurse. And now he's an emergency room nurse working in Las Vegas. After Matt, we decided, Robin and I, to adopt a wounded soldier. And none of the VA hospitals would help us. Nobody would help us. Elected public officials wouldn't help us. So I kept calling hospitals and places, and lo and behold, at the San Diego Naval Hospital, I got this lady, her name is Shirley, I forget her last name, and she set up appointments for Robin and I to meet 9 wounded Marines. We checked into a hotel, and we paid each wounded Marine $100 to show up for 1 hour. And we interviewed them over 2 days. And at the end of 2 days, Robin says to me, I know we agreed to adopt 1. You think we could adopt 2? And I said, sure. So we picked one, Alberto Aranda, and the second one was Josiah White. Both of them were wounded in Afghanistan. Josiah White, his leg was pretty bad mauled from an IED, and he wears a big, long metal brace on his leg. And I tease him about using WD-40 on it so it doesn't squeak. And Josiah wanted to become an aeronautical engineer, so he went to UC San Diego for 4 years. And in school, he met his wife-to-be in physics class. He graduated, and he works on the East Coast as an engineer for Grumman, designing the G550 business jets. Alberto Aranda, he's from Northern California, and he always wanted to be a fireman. So he went to Mount Sac Junior College, and he got his 2-year AA diploma. And then from there, he went to Cal State LA to get his 4-year diploma to become a fireman. And he unfortunately could not pass the physical. And so he couldn't be a fireman. So he asked me to pay for a 5th year, which I did. And he got a degree in counseling. And now he works at the VA counseling wounded veterans. And Robin and I are extremely proud of our 2 wounded warriors. I have 2 worst days of my life. The first, 81, end of January, beginning of February, I don't remember the exact date. I called Jay Grant and I said, Jay, I have enough money. What should I do? And he said to me, go buy houses, Bob, for your kids. So the next day I went out in the evening with Matt Quitman. We went looking to buy houses. And I come home that night and Wendy says to me, I want to talk to you. I said, fine. So we go upstairs to talk and she says, I want to divorce you and it's all your fault. That was by far one of the worst days of my life. At Cedars-Sinai Hospital, my dad was going to have bypass surgery. And simultaneously in Chicago, Gary Rothbart's mother, Julia, who I loved, she was like a second mother to me, she died, and it was the funeral. And I didn't know what to do, to be here for the living or go back to Chicago for the dead. And so I decided to do both. I got to the hospital real early. I said whatever I needed to say to my dad. I flew to Chicago for the funeral. And I remember I walked into Julia's house and her daughter, Myrna, and I was doing real well until Myrna came up to me and said, "Oh, Bobby, Mom loved you so much." And then I just started crying like a little kid. Anyway, I flew back to LA after being in Chicago for like 3 hours. And I was there for my dad when he got out of surgery. That was a bad day for me. I think I have about 4 best days. First one was when Cameron was born. And the second one was when Ashley was born. The third one when Ashley passed the bar. The fourth was when I married Robin. And that might be the best of the best. And then the last one was walking down the aisle with Ashley when she got married. Those are my 5th best days. As we do this videotaping, I just turned 70 years old. And in closing, I want to say that your reputation, my reputation, people's reputation, you can only lose it once. If you do something to hurt people, to do something wrong, you can't gain your reputation back. And I've tried all my life to do the right thing. Sure, I've made mistakes and I've apologized profusely for, but once you've lost it, it's gone forever. There's an old expression that says, happy wife, happy life. I didn't know that till after my divorce from Wendy. She was not very happy with me. She wasn't very happy with life. And as I've grown and matured, I've practiced that all my days with Robin to keep her happy. And Robin is happy on her own, but I'm working very hard to make sure it lasts. So I'm keeping her happy, and I have a happy life.